Greetings, cyberspace, and welcome to episode 7 of the Double Density podcast with your hosts, Brian and Angelo. Now, Angelo, you want to start the episode with a statement about our artwork. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I was looking at Twitter today, and there was a retweet of an account I never followed, I didn't really know about, which apparently you know, because then I saw you were a follower. So it's from Lazy Game Reviews, and they also have a floppy disk as their Twitter avatar.
That's right.
And it looks it almost exactly like ours, except it's more green.
The main difference between theirs and ours, or his and ours, I should say, is that his is a picture of a diskette with the words LGR printed on it, whereas you yourself created the image that goes with our podcast.
Yeah, it's not a picture. It's just created in Pixelmator.
Right, so let's give a quick plug to Lazy Game Reviews. Great guy, great YouTube channel. So he does things like reviews old games, looks at very old tech. He also does thrift store videos, which are kind of cool, and he is really into PC collecting, so I suggest checking that out. Once again, no affiliation with us at all. I'm glad you made that clear. No one's come out and accused us of this. You just want to make sure that everyone understands that there's a differentiation between the two of us.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't want somebody to think that we went out and stole that. I had no idea it was there. And it's kind of funny, though, because it seems like his channel is right up our alley.
Yeah, and I've been following him on YouTube for years, and I suggest you yourself check it out when you have some downtime. When you're done this podcast, obviously.
I've been doing that a lot lately because of a link you gave me earlier this week. I've been going through a lot of the old GameSack videos. They're a lot of fun.
Another great YouTube show with a lot of great production values, I find.
Yeah, and they're just two nerdy dads like me.
Yeah, so you identify with them.
Arguably, I think that I'm actually cooler than them, but in terms of the traditional cool, but because they're really, really nerdy.
The thing that always makes me laugh about GameSack videos in general is that they really love video game music and spend a lot of their time talking about the music within video games and how they've added music to their phones to listen to. Like, it's a little too down the rabbit hole for me.
Well, yeah, one of the ones I was watching yesterday, he talked about how he spent a whole day listening to a soundtrack of a game. It was some shooter from Square. I like them. They seem like guys I could be total friends with.
Speaking of older dudes, though, I have a bone to pick with you as an older person. So I was perusing our social media streams today when I noticed, Angelo, that you are not great at Facebook when it comes to page content, because you accidentally shared the double density post as double density instead of yourself, which is kind of confusing if you've never really used the page features or have been the administrator of a page, right?
I've never been, and I felt really embarrassed because it's such a dad thing to do. Something that I would normally get a call about to fix for somebody else. In this case, I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to Facebook.
My other favorite move that I noticed moments after that is that you liked a double density post as double density. It's not the level of old people Facebook, but it's there.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, actually. Sorry about that.
But you know what? You're forgiven. And as you said today, you were able to devise an intricate photo backup system, yet Facebook eludes you.
It's kind of beyond my scope of how I deal with technology. It's not something I really am interested in too much, about posting things and all that stuff. It's just I go there to post some pictures of my kids so people can see them. But I've actually had to come back to Facebook more than I want to because of this podcast. But that's okay, because I like doing the podcast, and I think it's an okay trade-off.
So quick plug, if you'd like to follow us on Facebook, it's facebook.com/double density podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at double density podcast, one word, and also finally on Twitter at double_density. I figured this was a good place to plug it while we're talking about
thanks
things.
for listening to the show. That was a good episode, Brian.
Yeah, great. I'll talk to you next week then.
All right. See ya.
So let's quickly segue into something that is sort of timely, but sort of not. So you linked me earlier this week to an announcement that Apple is starting to engage with podcasters more.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So by the time this gets posted, it'll have been a week after WWDC, but Apple is actually allowing podcasters to rent studio time for 1 hour blocks to podcasts from WWDC to make things easier for the many people that are going to be going there who actually have podcasts that they produce. and it'll make it easier instead of having to drag equipment around. But the thing is, a lot of the prominent Apple-centric podcasts I listen to usually go way over an hour. But if people want to do that for an hour, it's nice that Apple's offering that. And I think they're completely offering it free of charge, and I'd hope so because I think it costs thousands of dollars to get to WWDC.
Well, that was my point, is that apart from the entry fee of becoming a delegate at WWDC, it is free as far as I can tell. So a couple of episodes back, we were talking about how Apple seems to be making its way towards being friendlier to podcasters in general, right?
Yeah, well, we were hoping that one of the things that they'll be announcing at WWDC, which was last week again, but in the future from now, would be that the iPad and iOS would be able to handle multiple audio streams at the same time, which would greatly help in many podcaster setups like our own.
Right. Speaking of our podcast, though, so I don't think we've explained how we operate necessarily. So what we do is we record 10 days before we launch. We give ourselves a large buffer window in order to be able to edit, listen, re-listen, and sort of get as happy as we can be about our podcast, which is why while we do some timely stuff, some of the timeliest stuff does get pushed backwards, right? So that's, we're recording 3 days out before WWDC, but as this comes out, it'll be a week and a half or a week afterwards.
Exactly. We try to release late Sunday, early Monday, I guess. I think all of our episodes have dropped on Sundays, actually. But Sunday or Monday, that's usually when we release, beginning of the week. And this will be coming out on, I guess, June 12th. But that'll be a week after WWDC, which will be this coming Monday. I'll have taken a day off for that so that I can enjoy it on the comfort of my couch on my Apple TV.
Did you specifically take the day off for this?
I did. Well, I actually had vacation days to take, and I figured the Monday would be a great day to take that vacation day because I'll be able to watch WWDC in my own home and not have to only watch an hour of it on my lunch hour and then kind of have it playing in the background while I work.
You know what? Your devotion to technology is astounding to me.
Well, WWDC is a lot of fun. Well, a lot of fun for people like me.
Well, as you said last week, it is your Super Bowl.
It is a lot of, it's I look forward to it. It's you get to find out what's going to be coming in the fall and then be prepared to tell all your friends about it because that's all they want to hear about.
So, speaking of spending time in front of Apple TV and watching things that you enjoy, you have, you're currently watching iZombie, correct? So you're on season 1 or season 2?
I'm into season 2. It's a fun show. I find the actress Rose McIver, I believe, she's quite delightful. It's funny. There's a bit of action. It's about zombies. It's kind of cool. It's an interesting take on the topic, but they did something that bothered me this week, and we can make a whole segment about this from time to time because I don't know if you watch a lot of TV, but a lot of shows treat technology incorrectly. And in this episode I was watching, a character took the thumb of a sleeping person and put it on the screen of their phone to unlock it. And that doesn't really exist yet. Samsung couldn't get it to work on their Galaxy S8, so they had to put their fingerprint reader on the back of the phone. And the rumors are that Apple's trying their best to get it onto their new iPhone that'll be coming out hopefully this year, onto the front of the screen, but behind an actual screen and not to have a button on its own. And they're having apparently a bit of trouble with that, if the rumors are correct. So currently, that's not actually possible to do, but it was done on the show, and it kind of annoyed me. And whenever the stuff like that happens, it takes me completely out of the experience for a few seconds. I mean, I get right back into it, but stuff that probably most people would never notice, but I notice it right away.
So last month, I had the pleasure of seeing the newest Fast and the Furious film, Fate of the Furious.
I heard it was a lot of fun.
It's fun, but if I were to, sort of talk about the biggest issue with it, I would rename the movie Fate of the Furious : Battle of the Hackers, because there's a whole lot of hacking going on during the entire film. There is the main bad guy flies around in a plane that is a mobile hacking center.
That's pretty amazing, though.
But the thing is, like, it's so ludicrous because of the things that they do and accomplish very quickly that it makes no.
And is the hacker ludicrous?
No, he does hack actually at one point. So yes, but that took me out of the experience for most of the movie, as well as the classic 1995 film Hackers, right, with Johnny Lee Miller and Angelina Jolie. Like, most of that movie's bull.
Yeah, that's pretty much garbage, right? But it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean,
People enjoyed it. I thought that movie was amazing when I saw it.
yeah, but you were young and impressionable, right?
1995, I was 18, 17.
And so you actually were into it.
It was all right.
Something, though, that is a little more interesting than that is a graphic novel called WYSIWYG, which details a Kevin Mitnick-like character who is not Kevin Mitnick, but were you to infer his life were similar to it, then you wouldn't be wrong. And it manages to get a lot of the core explanations and sort of the minutia of 80s and 90s hacking correct.
Why does this sound familiar? Did you send this to me at one point or something?
Yeah, I sent it to you last month. I sent you a link to it, I think a review or something.
Oh, yes, okay. See how much I pay attention to things?
You're the best at this. I'm so glad to have you on board with me.
I try my best.
So something that you want to talk about is a possible iPhone disruptor, which I think is very interesting. So Andy Rubin, the architect of the Android OS, is back on the scene with his new company Essential. And its first product out of the gate is something called Phone. So capital P, Phone.
I think, yeah, now every time you say phone, I'm going to laugh.
It's also, they also have a product called Home, which is a dock, capital H Home. So capital P Phone, capital H Home. So Essential is a boutique shop, and they can pursue things that others, people like Samsung or Apple can't even begin to want to do due to financial commitments to their shareholders as publicly traded companies. So do you sort of want to get through some of the specifics behind Phone, capital P?
Well, it's more that it's kind of pretentious, don't you think? The articles I was reading come off sounding like that he's going to be creating something completely spectacular, and your phone, it's not going to be Essential's phone. It's tailor-made for you because it uses straight Android, which you can get from a Pixel phone, I think. Reading stuff like this, the tech industry starts fawning over things all the time, falling over themselves, hoping that somebody will come around and challenge Apple and Samsung on the Android side of things to take over and create something new, when it's, at the end of the day, it's just another phone. The front of it looks really weird.
So the phone's made of titanium and ceramic, right? Which is so the phone is, let's start with saying the phone is definitely a niche product. It retails for will retail for almost $700 USD, right?
iPhones and the iPhone and the Samsung phones are that expensive too, right?
Almost as much, yeah.
I think so. And the new iPhone's going to be actually more expensive than that. But it's just the materials they're using are kind of interesting.
So yeah, it's made of titanium and ceramic, and in one of the articles I was reading, Rubin, I think it's the Wired article that we'll link to in the show notes, Rubin mocks Apple because at one point Apple was trying to make their iPhones out of titanium and couldn't make it at a price point that made sense to them.
So do we know how he's keeping the price so, well, it's not that low, but it's lower than anything Apple or Samsung makes at that level?
I haven't read anything about how that's working. I have no idea where he's sourcing his elements from or his products from. So I don't know, unfortunately, how he's keeping it at the $700 level right now.
Yeah, it's just like there seems to be a bit of hubris there. These things never end up working out. There's some connector on the back, a magnetic connector, which I think Apple has something similar. The dock connector, not the dock connector, but I forget what it's called. But there's a special connector on the iPads Pro that's magnetic and is used not in many peripherals, but in a few. And Microsoft has something similar as well. So he's touting this thing that they can expand on this phone. But as we saw with Google's Project Ara, it didn't really work out, and that kind of was dead before it even started. And I'm getting that vibe from this. The phones that they're showing in the Verge article, it came out later. They didn't mention in that article, but they're actually renders, which is totally fine. But tell us that they're renders; they're not actual pictures of the phone.
So to me, will this phone make a dent in the market? Probably not, is a safe assumption.
Yeah.
And I understand that they want to start having a whole other conversation, and this phone is sort of the impetus to that conversation about different ways in which products get out there away from the majority of phones, right? So it's Samsung and it's Apple that they're targeting right now in terms of being able to sort of disrupt their flow.
And they really shouldn't be aiming that high. They should be maybe targeting HTC or LG or some of the lower end manufacturers. And the ones that are really picking up steam aren't even Apple and Samsung. It's all the Chinese companies that are coming out of the woodwork, and they're doing super well in China because it's been mentioned a lot in the past few weeks, but in China, they don't really care what the OS is. They care more about the phone and the status symbol that comes along with it. But in terms of the OS, everybody uses something called WeChat over there, and that's what matters the most. And that is exactly the same on both Android and iOS, from the way I understand it. It's more just about having the coolest phone. And right now, the coolest phone on the market by far is the Samsung Galaxy S8. We'll see what Apple comes out with this fall. To me, I don't really care what the phone looks like that much. It's kind of neat how the Samsung one looks, but I can't deal with Samsung software. I'm so used to iOS that I would have a really hard time switching a phone just for the way it looks. Just like I would have a hard time switching Mac OS to Windows if the option was getting a computer as nice as my iMac, but it only ran Windows, I'd stick with the Apple OS. But I say that a lot, so.
Apple, are you making the sign of the Apple right now?
I just did.
Perfect. So taking a step back from that, actually sort of esoterically or globally, consumer technology is all about the trickle-down effect, right? So the reason we have smartphones in our pockets is because of the fact that the price point to produce these pieces is low enough that most people can afford it. So Rubin's device suggests that there's a market for higher-end niche gadgets, right? So the price point and the idea that, it's made of titanium and ceramic and all these other sort of doodads that come with it suggest a form of luxury, right? So I think although his end game may be altruistic in the sense that he wants to open up the conversation about smartphones, the funnel by which this phone has to go through in order to end up in the hands of the masses is fairly complex, right?
It's probably going to be really hard to manufacture at this point. That's why they don't really have any working prototypes that they can give to tech press. Once they start manufacturing, they're going to realize why Apple had so much trouble making the phone using the same materials. Usually, if Apple can't create something with enough stock to meet the demand, then a smaller company like Essential will have a lot of trouble, especially if their phone takes off. Look what happened with the Pixel last year. Everybody really wanted one. It was a great phone from Google finally, but it was almost impossible to get your hands on one. The back orders were months and months behind. Every time you went online to actually try and order one, especially the XL, it was always sold out. People complain about not being able to get an iPhone in a timely manner, but it's not because Apple can't make enough. It's just that demand's so high. So I guess, yeah, Apple can't make enough, but they make so many at such a huge scale that it's not really the matter that they don't know what they're doing and how to manufacture things. It's that there's so much demand for these things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. In one of the articles, someone from Essential, not Rubin, was saying that if they got orders for 50 million phones, that they would be screwed, essentially, right? So the idea that this is a niche product, this may end up becoming a limited edition product. I mean, if Rubin has the money that he probably has backing this, he can do those sorts of things and see where it goes, right?
It could be like one of those Vertu phones that Russian oligarchs like to buy. Have you seen those?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so those are borderline ridiculous. It's not, you know what? Not even borderline. They're just ridiculous. It's the same people that drive Lamborghinis all the time. They're not for regular people like us. Regular people like us conform and buy iPhones and regular Android phones.
So that sort of leads me to my next point about this, right? So we live in an age of patronage, from supporting Kickstarters to sending regularly scheduled fees on Patreon to content creators and subscribing to our favorite personalities on Twitch. We give money to what we believe in. Do you think this trend extends to Essential? I don't know. I think that Rubin is hoping that people will see this and want to quote unquote buy local, but I'm not sure if it will gain enough of a platform or enough visibility in order to be able to do that.
You say that, is it being made in the USA?
I have no idea, but
I didn't notice anything like that.
But the way that they talk about the product is that they want people on their side, sort of like when you go to your local non-chain coffee shop and, put your money down for a coffee there. And the same thing that like maybe the ingredients aren't sourced locally, but the labor is local.
Yeah, but that's what the Apple Store's for. That's one of the huge advantages of buying an Apple product is something breaks, you go to the Apple Store, you might have to wait in line, you might have to wait a few days for an appointment, but somebody will help you out, and they usually do it properly. I'd be curious to see what the customer service will be like from a company like Essential.
A friend of mine actually today is going through something a little bit similar. So he has a OnePlus phone, which also runs Android, and he, unfortunately, for some reason, the phone keeps turning off, and he has to send his phone all the way to California, and the estimated time in which it'll get fixed and back to him is about 2 weeks. So he's looking at 2 weeks without a phone in theory.
See, that's frustrating, right? And whereas if we have a problem with our iPhone or whatever, we just go to the Apple Store. I'm lucky enough to work a block away from one, like I've mentioned before. I would dread my iMac breaking because it's not a light thing to carry around. And it's funny, one of the considerations I made, and almost one of the reasons I bought a laptop, was because of if something does go wrong. And computers, no matter who makes them, it's all the same parts. These things can break. It would have been easier to just carry around a laptop. But the iMac was too hard to pass up. And at the price, you get a lot more computer for the same price, right? A MacBook Pro is really expensive these days.
Yeah, it certainly is. But I mean, the trade-off there too is that it's easier to get it serviced and fixed locally, whereas a lot of these boutiques. So, for example, like you were saying before, like what will Essential's customer service look like? How will they fix returns and things like that?
Yeah. Then who was phone?
Double density. Welcome back to the Double Density Podcast, and we're switching gears from technology to the paranormal. So this week, aerospace billionaire, that's billionaire with a B, Robert Bigelow, was on 60 Minutes, and he had some very interesting things to say about aliens on Earth. Angelo, did you hear about this?
I had heard about it earlier in the week, but I hadn't seen the 60 Minutes interview. And I'm not sure if the 60 Minutes interview was actually about aliens or if they were just interviewing him on his more mundane, well, as mundane as aerospace technology can be, actual endeavors. And he just started talking about how aliens were here, they've been here, he knows, he's spending millions and millions of dollars on finding this out. And for those of us in the know and who've been following the paranormal for years know that Bigelow and his company purchased the Skinwalker Ranch, where apparently a lot of anomalous activity has happened. And we've seen the Skinwalker Ranch on a lot of different TV shows. The most recent one I saw was a few years ago on a fun show called Joe Rogan Questions Everything, where he followed somebody to the Skinwalker Ranch. I don't know if you ever actually saw that.
Yeah, so it's currently up on Canadian Netflix if you want to check that out. So I did watch it a couple of months ago. If you'd like to learn more about the Skinwalker Ranch, there's a great, I use that word sort of sparingly, book called Hunt for the Skinwalker by journalist George Knapp. Was published maybe, I want to say, like a dozen years ago. So if you want to learn more about the goings on there and the quote-unquote spookiness associated with that, definitely check that book out. But yeah, as you were saying, Robert Bigelow has been a regular guest on a multitude of paranormal related broadcasts, including Coast to Coast AM. Like his first appearance was in 1999, and he most recently was on with George Norrie in 2013, right? So the talk of him believing in aliens is not a huge stretch of the imagination if you know the guy at all.
But most people probably didn't know that, right? Watching the 60 Minutes. I wish I knew what the actual interview was about. Was it about his belief in aliens, or what was it? Do you know? Because the article I saw didn't really mention that.
The segment was about how he's working with NASA right now to create these habitats in space, and sort of veered towards alien talk. So the interviewer asked him, do you believe that UFOs have come to Earth? And he says, yes, they have been and are coming here, and I have spent millions and millions and millions. I probably spent more as an individual than anyone else in the United States has ever spent on this subject.
So he really wants to know the truth, and I think he thinks he's figured it out, right? I wish I knew what he knew.
It's very interesting the way that he frames things, right? So the next question that the interviewer asks is it risky for you to say in public that you believe in UFOs and aliens? And Bigelow's answer is great. He says, I don't give a damn. I don't care, which to me suggests that he knows something that we don't, though what that is, is left unsaid and has been left unsaid for some time.
Because somebody like him doing this would be a close equivalent would be like Elon Musk, who we know to be very intelligent and knows how the world works. You would think somebody who owns an aerospace company is actually intelligent. Is he an aerospace engineer by training? Do you know what his background is?
I have no idea what his background is. I know he's the head of an aerospace agency and he's worked on that. I don't know of his credentials though.
And it does bear his name, so he actually founded it.
Well, so, bringing it back though to Elon Musk for a sec, like he's not impervious to saying other things. Like last year, he was going around saying that there's a great chance that we're living in a hologram or a simulation, right?
And that's a whole episode unto itself, which I would like to explore one day. I don't know which one is more feasible. Actually, they're both out there ideas, but neither of them are actually falsifiable at this point. There's just no proof to support them.
Right. So given that, and given the fact that a lot of these headlines mention that Robert Bigelow works in tandem with NASA on some projects, do you think his statements cause a liability issue with NASA, i.e. his credibility for other things if he's going around saying, I know that aliens are here, they've been here, I'm probably hanging out with them?
Well, we'd have to separate his thoughts from the products he's creating for NASA. If the habitats work and they're safe and astronauts can use them to their advantage, then who cares what he thinks about aliens? Now, if that belief is hurting the research going into these habitats and they're flawed in one way or another, or maybe he's made some weird hatch in them to let the aliens in, then we'd have to kind of worry. But if they work and NASA trusts that his company and his engineers can actually develop a good product for NASA to use, then who cares? It's just that, yes, the figurehead of this company is saying what probably a lot of NASA scientists think is a little outlandish. I like to fall on the side of I don't know what he knows, so I can't really speak on his behalf, but we have no proof of anything that he's saying. That's the thing that bothers me about these people like him that like to spout this out and then just don't present anything. Look, if you're rich and you don't care what other people know, just tell everybody. Just come out and say it. Show us what you have. But everybody that always says they have all this great evidence never produces it. I'm willing to believe you if you actually produce the evidence. I'm not the type of person that I'll just blindingly dismiss you. But until you actually produce something that's of value, then I'm gonna stick with the status quo. And the status quo is that right now there's no proof that aliens are visiting the Earth.
Well, no proof that we have access to, right? I mean, the guy is saying that he spent millions and millions, and I guess he feels entitled to know these things because of the money that he spent.
I guess, but doesn't really change the fact that he hasn't shown anybody anything.
For sure.
Other than bills for millions and millions of dollars spent on alien research. I wonder how that's billed to the company and what accounting things. Hey, Bob, look, we're looking at the bills for this month, and this quarter shows millions and millions of dollars spent on alien research.
I love the idea that there's like, here's 13.5 mil in petty cash that's sort of accounted for, but not really.
This alien research, are you talking about illegals coming in and working for you? No. They're not from anywhere on Earth.
It's funny that you say that because one of my talking points for this was how long do you think it is before Trump seizes this opportunity to demand that the United States create an alien registry? And instead of the Red Scare of the 50s, there's now the Green Scare of the 2010s, right? So pivoting away from one kind of illegal to another kind of illegal.
Yeah, except they'd be gray. Aren't they supposed to be gray, not green? Green is 50s.
I mean, that's kind of a huge argument we can have unto itself, right? So depending on who you ask, they're green, gray, they look like humans, they might be robots, right? So
some of them look like dancers from Dean Martin videos or Dean Martin performances.
Wow, you really you're bringing up that Billy Meyer.
Yeah, well, you sent me a link to this weird article about how a photo from one of the Billy Meyer aliens can kind of look like a dancer that was in a Dean Martin performance.
Right, so they're claiming, so the story is that Billy Meyer got to photograph these women, and then he handed over the roll of film, and the roll of film was screwed with by Men in Black, who made him recreate the images of the women, and it just so happened that they were part of this Dean Martin show. And it's this whole thing, we'll put it in the show notes, it's kind of really crazy, but I mean, it kind of indicates this whole Billy Meyer craziness, and once again, like, he's had supposed contact with these Pleiadians for like 45, 50 years now. And where's the proof with that? And so his spokesperson / puppet, Michael Horn, is going around saying, you know, you guys are all liars. And then everyone retorts with, well, Michael, where's the truth? Where's your proof?
I've heard Michael Horn in a few talk shows, and he sounds like an awful, awful person. We might have to cut that out. Apparently he's very litigious.
That's fine. If he wants to come on the Double Density podcast and talk to us about the Billy Meyer experience, we can definitely discuss things with him.
There's no such thing as bad publicity.
Let's take some Vegas-style bets on this one. What are the odds that aliens are on Earth?
Oh, from what I've seen right now, it's 0.
0. What are the odds that aliens are influencing world politics?
0?
All right. And what are the odds that aliens are watching Netflix?
A bit higher. There's some really good shows on Netflix. I'd say like 25%.
So
20 to 1.
All
I'd
right,
say 20 to 1.
20 to 1. Fair enough. Double density. Welcome back. And speaking of people in ufology who have no proof, there is an article out there. I do believe it's from earlier this week, so the end of May. UFO investigator Peter Robbins comes out, and it turns out that after all of these years, suddenly doesn't believe his co-author Larry Warren's account of the Rendlesham Forest incident from 1980. So, Angelo, if you would, could you give us a little bit of background on the Rendlesham Forest incident? And apparently I have trouble saying Rendlesham, so let's just go with it.
I've been having trouble spelling that all night. So it's one of the more famous and more scrutinized UFO cases that have ever happened in the last, let's say, 50 years or so. It was at the end of December 1980, in the early morning. It's actually two separate incidents. So in the morning of December 26th, around 3 a.m., there was a routine patrol out on an airbase in Rendlesham Forest. I think it was the Bentwaters facility, and they saw some lights descending, so they thought it was a possible crashed aircraft. But as they approached it, apparently they saw a glowing object. It seemed metallic, colored lights, and then it just flew away. In the morning, they found some indentations, and then on the 28th, also in the early morning hours, apparently, which I find it odd that you would go investigate something in the early morning hours. They went to investigate the landing site. They took some radiation readings, and they saw a light. And there's actual a tape made of the event. Colonel Halt, who was leading the investigation, made a tape, and you hear him mentioning every time the light was flashing or blinking. But one of the issues that people skeptical of the case have brought up is that the timing of the blinking is pretty much the same as the timing of a lighthouse that's nearby. So it's possible he could have mistaken it for a lighthouse. Obviously, he's not going to say he did because it would seem kind of foolish. But when you're frightened, and I would be frightened, anybody would be frightened doing that, not knowing what you're seeing, your senses are heightened, you don't understand what's going on possibly, and you can mistake that for absolutely anything. There's also Sergeant Peniston, I don't remember his first name, but he was one of the ones that said he actually touched the craft, although nobody actually witnessed this. And his stories changed significantly year by year. And at one point under hypnosis, he actually thought that they were time travelers from tens of thousands of years in the future. So they weren't actually aliens, they were possibly time travelers according to his hypnotic regression. But
I mean, you say potato, I say potato in this case, right? Aliens or time travelers, it's all kind of the same thing. It all comes from the ether.
Yeah, and we don't know what it could possibly be that he saw. Or in his case, since nobody actually saw him do anything with this craft, We don't even know if he's telling the truth. He keeps changing his story. So that becomes the issue, right? I no doubt think that they saw something, right? That these are not idiots. They were military personnel. They were there. They had a job to do. They were responsible adults. They saw something. One of the explanations is there was a piece of some space debris that actually fell to Earth that night in the area. So it's possible that they saw a fireball from that, but that only explains one thing.
I mean, this is a multi-evening event, right? Like, it just wasn't one incident. It was a series of incidents over 3 nights.
Exactly. And there's so many possibilities there that it becomes something bigger than it may have actually been. And it's hard because the human memory is so easily manipulated that they can have completely remembered something that they actually never saw. And I don't want to say that these people are lying. They might not necessarily be lying. They might just have something going wrong with their memory there. And it's human nature. That's why eyewitnesses are the worst kind of testimony. And I always found it weird that an eyewitness could cause a conviction in any sort of criminal case, but that's what life is, I guess. But in this case, most people usually are terrible. You can ask me the color of a car that just passed by, and I probably would get it wrong.
I'm glad you're not reliable, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, I'm not reliable. No, most humans are not reliable witnesses unless they have a photographic memory.
And like the majority of the human population does not.
Exactly.
So a couple of things. So firstly, Peter Robbins in all of his still images kind of looks like a Bond villain. He's got that dead stare.
Does he have the tough pose?
He has the tough pose, and he's also wearing, in some of his pictures, an Indiana Jones style hat.
Was that an alien? I just heard something.
Yeah, it's a motorbike, I think.
Oh, that's boring.
I know.
Yeah, I like his hat.
So the last memory I have of Peter Robbins was he appeared on an August 2015 episode of Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell, which is weird because he spent most of the program whining about ufologist Nick Pope and how Nick Pope was doing him dirty publicly. And it even got so far, so Art told him to stop and just focus on the case because he was on for 2 hours in the first hour. He was building up to this great big surprise, and everyone figured it had to do with the Rendlesham case, but it actually was just him besmirching the good name of another ufologist or UFO critic, I guess, But it's so weird because it got to the point where Art was reading on-air comments and emails from listeners telling Peter Robbins to shut up.
Yeah, the thing is with ufology, it's funny, but they all fall into these little niches, and they're almost like console gaming fanboys, where there's somebody going to be talking about how great the Super Nintendo's Sony music chip is, but then the other guy's going to say, but look, the Genesis has blast processing. They never tend to agree on anything, and basically what happens is that if you disagree on one thing, then you're completely wrong about everything else, and they have a hard time getting along. Whereas if it was a more close-knit community where they can actually get along and agree on certain things, or at least amicably disagree, a lot more work would probably get done.
Well, it's funny because now in the Mirror article, right, so Nick Pope was very critical of Peter Robbins 2015, and now in the Mirror article, it turns out that Peter Robbins and Nick Pope are siding against Larry Warren, right? So now they've formed this alliance.
It's so odd, but maybe he had a change of heart and he realized, okay, I'm actually completely wrong on this, and maybe there is nothing to this case and Nick Pope is right. Because Nick Pope is kind of a skeptic, right?
He used to work for the Ministry of Defense, right? So a lot of his stances were coming from reviewing field reports and things like that, and sort of he approaches it from a more rational standpoint than a lot of his peers do.
I like his style. He's a bit more of a believer than I am, but he is interesting in how he approaches the topic. He's a lot more clinical about it. More skeptical, and that's something I find so interesting, the animosity between skeptics and believers. People like you and I were kind of caught in between, although we fall more on the skeptical side of things, but I'm not like an ardent crazy skeptic either. It's just but there aren't, most of the skeptics out there aren't that bad. I know a lot of ufologists could not stand Philip J. Klass, but he wasn't a bad guy. He just really didn't believe that there was any possibility that UFOs existed. And sometimes he kind of stretched his own beliefs in trying to disprove whatever anybody was saying. So that's where ufologists kind of get upset. There's so much anger there sometimes between the two camps, I guess.
Yeah, ufology is a very territorial profession. I mean, if we're going to call ufology a profession instead of what I'd like to call it, which is a glorified hobby, I think in this field, the medium is just as important as the message a lot of the time, right? So the idea that you present yourself as a character presenting a narrative. So things like backstabbing and name calling do happen a lot. And I think whenever
it's like wrestling.
Yeah, exactly. And I think whenever there's a lack of proof, right, like we were talking about before, in fields like this, it's important to defend what little scraps of quote unquote proof there are. And it's also a very reputation centered field. So you were saying before, like if you disbelieve someone's specific view on one, then it kind of discredits them and all of their body of work, and it allows people to sort of get in there and peddle whatever they want with very little consequence at the same time too, right? So a lot of ufologists who tend to veer towards the believer side, not the skeptic side, always have something to sell. People like look at Ed Dames, right? So all of his remote viewing apparatus, his multi-DVD sets for hundreds of dollars, his talks. And I mean, he had his infamous kill shot for like 20 years and that never happened. Or I mean, you look at Alex Jones, he's been around for 20 years, right? So he first gained prominence in talking about Y2K and how that's going to end the monetary system. And then, doing something like breaking into Bohemian Grove with a cameraman at the turn of the century in order to learn more and then peddling things based on that. So while he was busy creating all of this panic about Y2K, he also had something called the Hardware Store, which was sort of an apocalypse pack that you could buy for your family.
The thing is that people always end up forgetting how wrong a lot of these alarmist people are. Like Alex Jones, he's wrong almost all the time. He's been right about a few things, but they were obvious things. And oftentimes he's just mostly wrong. And he likes to stir up this fear in people. He kind of reaches into the primal emotions of people to get them to kind of see his way. And we've talked about him a lot, and he's just annoying most of the time, but he's kind of dangerous. Look what's happened in the US now. That look who's in power just today. So June 1st, Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord. It's extraordinarily important that we understand how we're affecting the climate, but these people like him want to disregard, and when I say him, I mean Alex Jones. They want to disregard how we're affecting the environment just because it would hurt their bottom line, their actual understanding of how the world works. It would be completely ruined to them. And it's interesting though, now a lot of people who were climate change deniers are kind of coming around, but they're having a hard time coming around to the idea that it's caused by us, and that's why they don't want to change anything. But what they're more afraid about is actually the economic difficulties it may cause to completely change how the world works. But that's a rant for another day, I guess. It's
kind of analogous to white males not understanding how they're in a position of privilege and get very offended whenever that's brought up. I think it's kind of the same thing, where it's, if you look inwards at yourself and realize you're part of the problem, then you don't want to face that reality a lot of the time too.
Yeah, it's the thing is that if so many people are saying one thing, and you have to look at people's credentials too. A lot of these ufologists they like to. I always find it interesting how somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson never flaunts his PhDs or his doctor title in front of his name, or says he just calls himself Neil. But then somebody like Bill Burns, who's a ufologist, always makes sure that people know he's a lawyer and he has a PhD.
Sort of related, sometimes people get their comeuppance, and you just made me think of one of my favorite people to sort of think about when I think about things like this is Sean David Morton. So, the man who's looking to go to prison for a maximum of 650 years due to all of the crazy money laundering and tax evasion schemes that he's pulled off, all in the name of quote unquote the truth. Whenever you read a bio of his, you see all of these credentials placed before and after. And it's funny, if you go to the UFO Watchdog website, so Sean David Morton a dozen years ago or 15 years ago sued the website, and the website won because Sean David Morton was not able to disprove any of the things. So what the website had done, they had gone through all of his supposed credentials and debunked everything. And Sean couldn't disprove any of the debunking, so he was forced to pay court costs. Right, so this guy in 94 was saying that, Bill Clinton was going to get shot in 96 to 98, and that just sort of perpetuated this whole 20-year streak of things that never, ever, ever came true.
And whenever there's the year-end roundups of psychic predictions, none of them are true. None of them come true. And the only ones that do come true are the super vague ones, like, there'll be an earthquake in the Far East. Shockingly, there'll be an earthquake in Japan, right? There's an earthquake in Japan like once a month.
It's almost like the rearview mirror of people involved in the unknown or the esoteric or the paranormal is broken. It's like they're unable to look back and stay accountable to themselves because that affects their business model.
Yeah, and then that's why I usually end up siding with scientists or skeptics when it comes to these matters, because they have proven track records. One of my favorite people in the world who was a highly well-known UFO skeptic, and that's Carl Sagan. He's written my favorite book, which is A Demon Haunted World, in terms of nonfiction anyway. The way he explained things, the way he understood the world, he was always willing to say he was wrong about something, and he did change his views on certain things, and that's something that's really important to understand. A more recent example is somebody like Bill Nye, who was adamantly against GMO foods until he actually read the research and realized that a lot of the information he was reading was incorrect, and he changed his mind because the science changed his mind. And it's important to actually look at all the facts and not necessarily go with your heart, go with your mind. That's usually the most important thing.
It's kind of funny that you talk about that, because I think that the burden of proof is placed on a lot of different people. And like I was saying before, there's so little proof, especially in ufology, that exists, that it's very hard to want to buy into a narrative when it's just the words of people. And as you were saying before too, eyewitnesses make horrible testimonials, and then you're supposed to take a person at face value over and over in all of these incidences where there is no proof physically.
That's the thing. And I was just about to look somebody up, but hold on, I just want to get his name right.
So funnily enough, at the same time, you were speaking about Carl Sagan, but Carl Sagan himself received a lot of blowback, not necessarily from ufologists, but from fellow scientists who thought that he was spending his time in the public arena, essentially wasting his time trying to talk to these ufologists and people who believed in the paranormal, and instead of concentrating on his scientific pursuits.
But he was smart to do that, because this stuff is really interesting. It's something that's beyond our understanding of how the world works and seems fantastic. And it's important that we actually look into it, because people make claims and a lot of them seem sincere. But sometimes it's important to actually not give them a whole well actually type lecture, but just point them in the right direction to see that it's probably not a shadow person you saw in your peripheral vision. It's just the way peripheral vision works. The person I was looking for was Ray Stanford. I actually got into a few heated arguments with him on a few forums a few times, and he's one of those people that says he has reams and reams and reams of actual evidence, and then whenever he posts stuff, it's all stuff that makes no sense. And he says he has photos of UFOs where you can actually see inside and see the people occupying the UFOs, but he's never actually presented this evidence, ever.
Well, that's not a huge surprise. I mean, that's kind of the... How would you like it if you received 300 pages that were actually blank?
But that's the best.
I mean, I think what we're beginning to realize, Angelo, is that you and I should form some kind of UFO or paranormal court where people present the evidence and we evaluate it. We look at the testimonials. We render verdicts, right? So I feel like you and I need to get into a position where we can be able to do that on a regular basis.
That could be a lot of fun. Have people call in, give us their cases.
Yeah, I will wear a wig. as per the British court system. But yeah, I think that anyone who has a UFO story to tell over any lengthy period of time, I think everyone in that realm has something to sell, right? A tale is no tale unless it has a souvenir attached to it in this case. And I think that's why the market is flooded with books, a fair amount of them from vanity presses, not major publishers. And also the bane of my existence, poorly shot and edited DVDs of conference talks surrounding multiple facets of the paranormal. So I've been suckered into buying a lot of these multi-packs from companies like Mill Creek, who slap on a 2-hour shot on DV tape, not properly mic'd conference talk about any sort of UFO incident, and after 10 minutes you turn it off.
That's it. You just kind of lose interest in it sometimes.
And I also think that it's a different landscape than it was 25 years ago, where you could sell a VHS tape for $40 or get someone to sign up for your newsletter for $12.95 a month, right? Because the internet is so accessible that it debunks a lot of the things out there, and it lets you know that you shouldn't be spending your money on an inside look at the chupacabra.
Well, and then there's all those really poorly made YouTube channels of just people posting dust on lenses, and it all comes back to rods again.
It always comes back to, I think the next episode we're doing something on rods. I think that I'm going to declare that right here. Now next week is Rod Week.
Rod Week. I was perusing a forum, and somebody had posted pictures of evidence caught on tape from the International Space Station of UFOs seen from outer space. Every single one was either dust or space debris.
One of my favorite ISS related stories is some time ago, I think within the last year, the feed went down, and some people were claiming right before the feed they saw a mysterious object enter the frame.
Of course.
It was probably a rod, though, let's be honest.
A really big rod.
So it's the listening So to the listening audience out there, if you have any favorite UFO tales, or if there's anyone that you think we should be looking at, go ahead and tweet at us at double_density, or you can message us on Facebook, or message us on Instagram, or email us doubledensitypodcast@gmail.com. We'd be more than happy to hear you out and sort of explore anything, because we're always open to audience suggestions, and that's partly what shapes our show too, and I think it's very interesting. So if you guys have anything that you want us to discuss or look at in this realm, we'd be more than happy to listen to your requests.
Especially if you disagree with us. That's something that I think Brian and I pride ourselves in, not being confrontational, especially when we disagree with somebody. We're very friendly Canadians, and we like to hear different points of views. Now, to a certain degree, right? If you think that you're actually a hybrid alien or something, we might kind of not really be too keen on talking to you. But
I think in that case, we would strike up a UFO court and make our decision based on the evidence present.
But if you do have valid concerns about what we said, like you have an actual explanation for what happened at Rendlesham, you think you have evidence of a UFO, if you have a really good picture taken with a good camera, those things seem to be in hard to come by, and it's something I always say is, it's surprising because it's not like everybody has a really high definition camera in their pockets, right?
Are you talking about the phone, capital P?
Yeah, everybody has one now, especially once Andy Rubin democratizes it for everyone.
So my theory, and I'm going to close on this, I think that Andy Rubin and Robert Bigelow should team up and create the best phone ever that's centered around capturing alien feats and paranormal subjects. So what do you think?
It would be really great. I'm sure it would have an EVP recorder that you could hook up to that little magnetic connecting dock on the back of the essential phone, and you'd have some essential EVPs.
See, now you're speaking my language, and that language is aliens, ghosts. Where are you? Come find us.
Help me.
Is your scalp tingling? Double density. So that's it for episode 7 of the Double Density podcast. Tune in next week as Angelo and I read our favorite Star Wars fan fiction novels to you in an agonizingly slow pace. So Angelo, have a good week.
See you, Brian.
Bye.
Ow, Jesus, she just bit my finger. Oh, God damn it. What the hell? Ugh. It's a cat. Like when I give her attention, then she doesn't want it. Go away. Sorry. I don't know what the hell she wants either. It's like she's fed. There's nothing else for me to do.